Morning, everyone. the meeting today. She's writing exams. So we'll need to nominate the acting chair for this meeting. Can I?
Chileka, I nominate the Honorable Singh.
My hand is up.
Honorable Singh hasn't joined the meeting. Honorable Phillips.
My hand.
Okay.
Oh, my hand. Chileka, can I greetings to all the members. Can I nominate Honorable Mdise to chair the meeting?
Okay, thank you. Can I get agenda?
My hand is up, Honorable Mbata. I second it.
Mr. Mudise? Mr. Dumela, and Tate Mudise. Do you accept the nomination?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Thank you. Can I call for a second name? Further nominations, members? Or do we agree that Mr. Mudise should chair the meeting?
We agree.
Agree from our side, and thank you, Tileka, for following the protocol perfectly spot on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brian. Mr. Mudise? You may proceed and chair the meeting. Thank you, members.
Recording in progress.
Mr. Mudise?
I'm here. I'm here now.
Okay.
Can you see me?
Yes, I can see.
New shirt on. Putting his new shirt on. Thank you.
Honorable members, good morning. I see the hand of Mambata already before we even start. I want to assume that is a legacy hand. But then without
it's a legacy hand.
Oh. She has a doctor's appointment, so she'll be leaving the meeting soon.
Oh, okay. No, we'll deal with that. Thank you very much again, honorable members. Good morning and welcome to the Portfolio Committee. Let me take this opportunity to welcome stakeholders that take in interest on the politics and conditions and discussions that are taking place in this Portfolio Committee. I want to check if the Honorable Minister is here. I do not see her. And the Deputy Minister. I do not see her. I don't see them, both of them. I see Honorable Singh. I see Honorable Weber. I see Honorable Phillips. Honorable Bryant. Honorable
Bata, Weber, Kapa.
Honorable Kapa, I see Honorable Kapa, Honorable Mkunu. The minister is not here, and the deputy minister.
No, they haven't joined.
I see the DG
But
is here.
Online.
Nicholas and the DG are here. Honorable Singh, your hand is up.
Yes. Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning to you and all the colleagues and our admin team and everybody else online. Just two things. One arises from the chairperson, I think, calling us yesterday, but I couldn't quite get the reason because I was in the mini plenary as well, why we couldn't proceed with the second half of today's agenda. Not that it is something that worries me because we've got so many other things happening. But secondly, now that both the minister and the deputy minister are not there, does it mean we're only going to get a technical presentation of the bill? Because I'm quite sure we will have questions of a political nature as well. So I don't know if they are still going to join us or they have other commitments, but I think that's something we should consider as we move forward on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Singh. I don't want us, Honorable Bryant.
Thanks, Chair. Just through you to Honourable Singh, the understanding, or my understanding from what the Chair told me yesterday when she spoke to me on the phone, was that the Minister was only going to be able to attend the first part of the meeting, i.e. the first agenda item, and then she would have had to leave for the second agenda item, which was the issues relating to fishing. But it appears that she's unable to attend the first part as well. So I don't know whether we should wait or not, but I'd be very averse to us not going ahead with this workshop now. I think we must do it, and hopefully, her or the Deputy Minister can join later, and then we can take some political questions if need be. I agree with Honourable Singh, but I also wouldn't want us to not do this workshop now. I think it's very important.
Right. Can we get someone from the department to check for us where the Minister is before we proceed? Before we even adopt the agenda as is. I see the end of Nicholas is up and the face of the DG. Nicholas, where is the Minister?
Thank you, Honourable Modise. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
The Minister is trying to join. She's just having connectivity issues. Apologies. So she will be joining for this first part. We're just trying to help her log in. Apologies to the other members. I've just been talking to her now.
Much better. Much better. Okay, I guess that clarifies your concerns, Honourable Singh and Honourable Bryant.
Indeed, indeed.
All right, let's give her about a minute or so, because in any way she's going to have to give us a background and lead the delegation and whoever is going to be running this workshop. Agreed?
Agreed.
All right. In the meantime, thanks, Mambata. In the meantime, Chilisi, can we get further apologies so that we put them on record?
Honorable Kancho will leave the meeting at 12. Honorable Mbata has got a doctor's appointment, like I mentioned. Chair is writing exams. So those are the 3 chair that I've received.
But Honorable Kancho can only leave the meeting if she has joined, but she's not here.
Oh, she has not joined, yeah.
So how will she leave?
I think she will join us, Chair. That's the message that she sent me.
All right. Okay. Whilst the Minister is busy joining, can we get a mover for the adoption of the agenda?
I'm happy to move, Chairperson.
I second, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Bryant. Thank you, Honourable Singh. There are no opening remarks prepared yet, so we'll just go straight to the Minister as soon as he joins. I hope that she has prepared the opening remarks, unlike the others.
The Minister has joined, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, the number has increased to 71. Welcome, Honorable Chrissy. A good morning to you.
Good morning, Chairperson, and good morning to all members of the committee. Chair, my sincere apologies. I've got connectivity challenges this morning. I'm on my phone, so I'm not able to put the video on.
All right, it's noted, and welcome, Comrade Minister. We had already adopted and moved with other items of the agenda. So it is clear today that we are only dealing with the climate change workshop. Without waste of time, let me invite you, Minister, to introduce the team that you're with, and whoever is going to lead that process can immediately commence. Minister.
Thank you very much, Acting Chair of the session. And Chairperson, our delegation is led by the DG, Ms. Nomfundo Chabalala, and she is accompanied by Mr. Jongiwiti and Mr. Klurumaro. They have prepared a very comprehensive presentation that looks at the bill on a clause-by-clause basis. And I think that we have all discussed in previous committee meetings that this bill is extremely important for our country, because although we have over a considerable period of time put in the architecture to deal with climate change, both mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions and throughout all the 44 district municipalities, climate response strategies that attempt to deal with adaptation to the consequences of climate change. What we all understand is that we are operating in a developing country where there are competing priorities. And in order for climate priorities to find their way into the mainstream of government planning processes at all levels of government, and also to ensure that these priorities are budgeted for, we do require a regulatory environment that makes this mandatory. And that is why the bill is so very important. The bill is obviously also important because a climate transition cannot just be a transition that is run by government. Obviously, it requires technological change in the private sector, and the bill lays the foundation for these processes through the establishment of mandatory carbon budgets. Furthermore, it also gives a regulatory expression to the nationally determined contribution to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. What is also important, Chairperson, is this concept that we are busy discussing at the moment, which is the concept of climate justice. This process of establishing a just transition framework is currently being co-created by the Presidential Climate Commission. And this bill will make the Presidential Climate Commission a statutory body and also give this commission a regulated status at law. But the concept of the just transition and the concept that those who are most vulnerable to climate change should not be bearing the risks alone without accessing the opportunities. This is also a concept that is within the climate bill. So I think that these are all the reasons why this bill is so important and why we really do need your help and support to ensure that we can pass this bill in the not too distant future. Of course, Chairperson, there are some aspects of the bill that we would want to flag today for consideration by yourselves. And obviously, in due course, you will come to to those aspects of the bill that you accept and those aspects of the bill that you think should be amended. We just want to flag an area which we think, because this bill has been very long in its development, is now a bit outdated. We will flag that today, but obviously this bill is now your bill, and you will, of course, in your wisdom, approach this bill in the manner that you feel best. So, Chair, I'm going to pause there. I do have to catch a flight a little bit later, so I will listen to the proceedings, and when I need to catch the flight, I will leave you, and you're in very good hands. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Who's leading the pack?
Chairperson.
Honorable Singh.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much to the Minister. And before the Minister has to fly off, she did mention to us, good morning, Minister, and everybody else again, that there are some issues that they need to flag. Now, would those issues be flagged by the presenter?
Through you, Chairperson, yes.
Thank you.
I'm just highlighting it because Chairperson, with your permission, because
you got cut a bit, Minister. We couldn't hear you.
Sorry, Chair. I'm saying that I'm just highlighting that we are flagging this issue. I mean, honourable members may think that it's a little bit premature to be discussing the actual way in which the bill would be processed by themselves. But because I know that this issue has already been raised by the chair of the committee, and I know that it's already being raised in the consultation process as an anomaly, it's important today that we flag that we agree it is indeed an anomaly. That's all. Thanks.
All right, are we able to roll now? Is it Jongi?
Yes, thank you and good morning to you, Honorable Chair, Honorable Members, Minister and DG and colleagues. Yes, we will be giving the presentation. I just want to mention that in the team, we also have our legal team led by DDG Vanessa Bandeman, but Mr. Tlo Ramaru will give the presentation now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Honorable Minister, Honorable Chair, Honorable Members. Good morning. I will just go through the bill as Minister has already alluded to. If we can go to the second slide. The aim really is to provide a clause-by-clause briefing on the climate change bill to this workshop. The next slide. In terms of the first clause, the purpose and the object of the purpose of the bill is to enable development of an effective national climate change response and a long-term just transition to a low carbon and climate resilient economy and society for South Africa in the context of sustainable development. We also outline a number of important definitions which range from adaptation, which means any adjustment in a natural or human system in response to actual or expected climatic stimuli or their effect which moderate harm or exploit beneficial opportunities, the adaptive capacity, which means the ability of system and institution, human and other organisms to adjust to the potential damage, the carbon budget, which means an assigned amount of greenhouse gas emission allocated to person in terms of section 25 for the direct emission arising from the operation of that person over a defined period of time, the carbon dioxide equivalent, which means the number of the metric tons of carbon dioxide emission with the same global warming potential as 1 metric ton of another greenhouse gas. Carbon sink means any process, activities, or mechanisms which removes the greenhouse gas and the aerosols and or the precursor of the greenhouse gas from the atmosphere. The next slide, please. The next slide continues with a set of important definitions. The definition on climate change, which means a change of climate that is attributed directly or indirectly to human activities that alter the composition of the global atmosphere. Direct greenhouse gas emission means greenhouse gas emissions from sources that are owned and controlled by a person. And of indirect greenhouse gas emissions, which means emissions that are a consequence of activities of a person but occur at source owned or controlled by another person. We have a definition on a just transition, means a shift towards a low carbon climate resilient economy, society, and ecological sustainable economies and societies, which contributes towards the creation of decent work for all and social inclusion and eradication of poverty. Mitigation, which means human interventions to reduce the sources or enhance the carbon sink of the greenhouse gas emission. The nationally determined contribution known as the NDC, as amended in line with the Paris Agreement and submitted by the Republic under, of course, the United Nations Framework on Climate Change in terms of Article 4.12 of the Paris Agreement. Next slide, please. The clause on definition continues, where we have the sector, which means a collective term for a group of activities with similar characteristics, which either emits greenhouse gases or are vulnerable to climate change. Sectoral emission targets mean the quantitative and qualitative goals inform sectoral policies and measures that may lead to greenhouse gas emission reductions. The subsectors means in respect to mitigation and further subdivision of groups of greenhouse gas emitting activities as defined by the latest version and guideline of the IPCC. The next slide. On the definition, I just want to also indicate that the better part of the definitions are also informed by the IPCC and the United Nations Framework on climate change to allow for the use of those universal definitions. On clause 2, talks about the object of the bill, which in the main provide for a coordinated and integrated response by the economy, society to climate change and its impact in accordance with the principle of cooperative governance. Also, the other objective is to provide for an effective management of the inevitable climate change impact by enhancing adaptive capacity, strengthening resilience, and reducing vulnerability, but also to make a fair contribution to the global effort to stabilize the greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere at a level that avoids dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system, and to ensure a just transition towards a low carbon economy and society considering national circumstances, and to also give effect to the international commitment and obligation in relation to climate change, but finally to protect and preserve the planet for the benefit of the present and the future generation. Next slide. Those are the sets of the objects. The bill also contains a set of principles on clause 3, and these include, of course, the need to integrate into decision making, which may have significant effect on the Republic's ability to mitigate or which exacerbate its vulnerability to climate change, but to also the principle that the National Environmental Management Principles set out in Section 2 of the NEMA Act are applicable for this Act. The principle around climate system should be protected for the benefit of present and future generation. The principle that acknowledges the international equity each country's common but differentiated responsibility and respective capacities, which simply means that we have a common responsibility, but we need to respond taking into account our respective capacities. A principle that you need to contribute towards a just transition, low carbon, climate resilient, and ecologically sustainable economy, which contributes to the creation of decent work for all, social inclusion, and eradication of poverty, and a principle of the need for integrated management in the context of climate change, which require climate considerations. The next slide, please. The set of principles continue, which include, among other things, the need for a decision-making to consider the special needs and circumstances of localities and people that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change, include, of course, the vulnerable workers, groups such as women, especially poor and rural women, children, especially infants and child-headed families, the aged and poor, the sick, and the physically challenged. The other principle focuses on the need for a risk-averse and a cautious approach to be adopted, which takes into account the limit of the current knowledge about the causes and effects of climate change and the consequences of decisions and actions in relation thereto. The need for climate change mitigation and adaptation responses to be informed by evolving climate change scientific knowledge. And we have seen in recent time the release of a number of scientific studies, the 6th assessment report by the IPCC. So this principle is taken into account that the response really need to take into account the evolving climate change scientific knowledge. An effective climate change response will require preventative measures to mitigate the causes of climate change and strengthen resilience through the adoption of adaptation measures. The next slide, please. Continuing on, the principles include, of course, the cost of responding to the adverse impacts of climate change and of mitigation, which must be paid by those responsible for causing the adverse impact. In this regard is the principle of polluter pay principles, and integrated climate change response, which requires enhancement for public awareness, is being acknowledged as one of the critical element, and the promotion of participation and action at all levels, recognition that robust and sustainable economy and health society depends on the service that well-functioning ecosystem provide, and that enhancing the sustainability of the economic, social, and economic services is integral component towards addressing climate change. The next slide. Those were the glosses on the principles. And on gloss 4 and 5, gloss 4 provides that the bill is applicable within the borders of the Republic, and that it binds all organ of state as defined in section 239 of the Constitution. And on clause 5, it rendered the bill to be a specific Environmental Management Act as defined by the National Environmental Management Act 1998, Act 107 of 1998, and require the bill to be read and interpreted and applied in conjunction with the Act. The next slide, please. On clause 6 and 7, clause 6 focus on regulating conflict with other legislation in the event of any conflict between a section of the Envisaged Act and other legislation specifically relating to climate change. The section of the Act would prevail. And on clause 7, it places legal obligation on every organ of state to coordinate, harmonize their various policies, plans, programs, decisions, and decision-making processes relating to climate change in order to ensure that the risk of climate change and impacts and associated vulnerabilities are taken into consideration and give effect to the principles and objectives as set out. And it really focuses on the alignment. It further enjoins organized labor, civil society, business to advise the Republic on climate change response and the mitigation of climate change impacts, adaptation to the effects of climate change towards attaining a just transition. The next slide, please. On clause 8 focuses on the provincial forum on climate change, and it requires the existing premier intergovernmental forum established in terms of Intergovernmental Relation Framework Act to also serve as the provincial forum on climate change. And the provincial forum on climate change is charged with coordinating climate change action in the relevant province and report to the Presidential Coordinating Council. And this is really to mainstream climate change within the existing structures as described into the Intergovernmental Relation Framework Act of 2005. The next slide, please. On clause 9 and 10, clause 9 focuses on the municipal forum on climate change, provide that all district intergovernmental forum established in terms of the IGRFA also serve as the municipal forum for climate change. And the municipal forum will be charged with the coordination of climate change action in the relevant municipalities and ensure that they are reporting to the provincial forum on climate change, and where necessary, establish an intergovernmental technical support structure in terms of Section 30 of the IGRFA. Clause 10, I think it now talks to the Presidential Climate Commission, as Minister has already alluded to, and this clause provides for the establishment of the Presidential Climate Commission, with representation from labor, civil society, business to provide advice on the Republic's climate change response. And it also outlines a number of members to be appointed by the President for the period determined by the President, and the Commission will determine its own procedure to be followed at meetings, and the department responsible for environment will provide administrative and secretariat support to the Commission. That's how the bill is structured at this stage. Next slide, please. On clause 9, I think it continues with the Presidential Climate Commission, which outline the functions, providing advice to the Republic's climate response to ensure realization of the vision for effective climate change response, advise government on the mitigation of climate change impacts, including through the reduction of emission greenhouse gases and adapting to the effects of climate change, and providing, of course, for progress towards government's emission reduction and adaptation goals. And on clause 12, it provides for the process for the appointment of members of the Presidential Climate Commission. And on the first function, it also emphasized the work that needs to happen in terms of the long-term just transition to climate resilient and a low carbon economy and society. Next slide, please. On clause 13, it provides that the President may require the Presidential Climate Commission to report on matters relating to reduction of emission of the greenhouse and adapting to the effect of climate change. And clause 14 provide for the administrative and secretariat support to the Presidential Climate Commission. Clause 15 is a new chapter that talks to climate change response in province and municipalities. And it outlines some of the requirements where the MEC responsible for the environment and the mayor of a district and metropolitan municipalities, as the case may be, will be required to undertake climate change needs and response assessment within 1 year of publication of the adaptation strategy. I need to emphasize that the adaptation strategy has already been approved by Cabinet. As Minister indicated, this bill will provide some of the legal basis for some of the work that has been ongoing. It further requires a climate change response implementation plan to be developed within 2 years of undertaking the climate change needs and response assessment. And the clause, of course, set out the prescribed content as well on what climate change needs and response assessment and climate change response plan should really include, and would require climate change response implementation to be integrated into the relevant environmental management plans of the province and other integrated development plan of district municipalities. This is emphasizing on the issue of mainstreaming climate change into the planning systems. And next slide, please. Clause 16 provides for the establishment of the adaptation objective in the Republic and the objective to guide adaptation response, which will be accompanied by an indicator to enable a clear measurement of progress. And the minister is also required to determine the date by which this objective needs to be mainstream or integrated into the various planning instrument policies and programs. Clause 7 requires the minister to develop adaptation scenarios which anticipate the likely impacts of climate change in the Republic over a short, medium, and long-term period, and the scenarios must be developed within 1 year of the Envisage Act coming into effect, and also prescribe relevant consideration and minimum content of what the scenarios should really entail. On clause 18, it provides that the minister, in consultation with ministers responsible for functions listed in Schedule 2, this is scheduled particularly for adaptation, develop and publish the National Adaptation Strategy and Plan, and set out the purpose of the adaptation strategy and plan and its content, and the minister may review on a 5-year interval the adaptation strategy and plan. The next slide. Clause 19 provide for the establishment of the development, of course, of the sectoral plans. It therefore provides that within 1 year of the publication of the National Adaptation Strategy and Plan, the minister responsible for the functional areas listed in Schedule 2, which are largely adaptation functional areas, must undertake an assessment of its vulnerabilities to climate change and determine the measures to respond thereto. And the relevant ministers of under those functional areas must then develop and implement the sector adaptation strategy and plan, which is based on the vulnerability assessment for each sector. And the relevant minister is also responsible for the submission of the progress report on the implementation of the sector adaptation strategy and plan to the minister, and provide a periodic review and amendment if required of the sector adaptation plans, strategy and plans. Clause 20 empowers the minister to request and obtain data and other information held by any person which is required for the purpose of the National Climate Change Response Policy. And the minister would therefore be expected to compile and publish a synthesis adaptation report that assess or take stock of the various interventions that are happening in the country. Next slide. On clause 1, it empowers the minister in consultation with cabinet to determine by notice the national greenhouse gas emission trajectory for the Republic. And of course, the current bill proposed a clause which the minister may publish the national greenhouse gas emission trajectory, the mitigation commitment under, of course, the NDC and under the United Nations framework, and provides for the mandatory review of the trajectory. I think this is one of the clauses that would see as we go along that As Minister indicated, the consideration is being flagged, but probably there might be a reconsideration of the schedule that talks to the trajectory. But I'll highlight that in the slides that would be coming as we proceed. The next slide. Clause 22 focuses on the sectoral emission target, empower the minister to list the sector and subsector which are subject to the allocation of the sectoral emission target. The minister must determine sectoral emission target for the listed sectors and subsectors, and the sectoral emission target must be aligned with the national greenhouse gas emission trajectory. And the sectoral emission targets are reviewable every 5 years from the initial publication. Require the relevant minister to annually report to presidency on the progress in achieving the relevant sectoral emission target. And the minister must synthesize this report and submit annual progress report on sectoral emission targets to cabinet. On clause 23, I think it focuses on the listed greenhouse gases and activities, and it provides that the minister must publish a list of greenhouse gases which the minister reasonably believe are likely to cause or exacerbate climate change. And the minister must publish the list of activities which emit one or more of the listed greenhouse gases which the minister reasonably believes cause or are likely to cause or exacerbate climate change. The next slide, please. Clause 24 talks to the carbon budget and require the minister to allocate carbon budget to every person undertaking listed activities and specify the minimum requirements to take into account when allocating carbon budget and its prescribed content. And a person who has been allocated carbon budget will be required to prepare and submit to the minister a greenhouse gas mitigation plan. And the greenhouse gas mitigation plan must comply with the requirements set out in this clause as may be prescribed by the minister. Clause 25. Clause 25 focus on the phasing down and the phasing out of synthetic greenhouse gas emission and declaration, and require the minister to identify synthetic greenhouse gases which must either be phased out or phased down. And this clause empower the minister in consultation with relevant ministers and any affected person to develop a plan for the phasing down or phasing out of the synthetic greenhouse gas. And the plan must comply with the requirements set out in the clause and must be reviewed and updated on a 5-year basis. And the clause also empower the minister to allocate carbon budget to persons who undertake activities which give rise to emission of the synthetic greenhouse gases. The next slide, please. Next slide. It's not moving on my side. Oh, okay, no, thank you so much. Clause 26 focuses on the national greenhouse gas inventory, and it provides for the development of the national greenhouse gas inventory and the compilation of the national greenhouse inventory report on an annual basis. And clause 27 empowers the minister to develop regulations relating to implementation of this or the envisaged act. The next slide, please. Clause 28 focuses on the consultation, and I think these are some of the key clauses for consultation that determine consultation process that the minister and the MEC and mayors must follow when exercising powers in terms of the Act, and the consultation must be appropriate for circumstances. In the case of the minister, it includes consultation with all ministers whose areas of responsibility will be affected by the exercise of the powers, and the relevant MEC in each province that will be affected by the exercise of the powers. And in the case of the MEC, it includes consultation with the members of the Executive Council whose areas of responsibility would be affected by the exercise of the powers, and the minister and all other national organ of state that will be affected by the exercise of powers. The clause 29 focuses on the public participation, set out a public participation process that the minister and the MEC and the mayor must follow when exercising the powers listed in the clause. And clause 30 focuses on empowers the minister and the MEC to delegate powers vested in terms of the bill in accordance to relevant provision of the NEMA. The next slide, please. The slide 31, slide 31 deals with the continuation on the access to information and concern the right of access to information and provide that information must be provided. Of course, subject to the Promotion of Access to Information Act 2000, Act number 2, and Protection of Personal Information Act number 4 of 2013. And slide clause 32 provides for the offenses and the penalties under the envisaged Act, whereas clause 33 provide that any person may appeal to the minister or an MEC against the decision taken by any person acting under a power delegated by the minister or the MEC. An appeal process, of course, will be done in terms of section 43 of NEMA. Next slide, please. Clause 34 deals with saving of the transitional provision relating to the declaration of the greenhouse gases as priority air pollutants and national pollution prevention plans regulations and national greenhouse gas emission reporting regulations published under Air Quality Act 2004, Act number 39, and the aforementioned subordinate legislation will remain in force and effect and serve as regulation under this envisaged Act until they are amended or replaced or repealed, and provide for the amendment, of course, of the NEMA in accordance to Schedule 4 to the envisaged Act. The next slide. Clause 35 provides for the short title and the commencement of the envisaged Act. Schedule 1 lists the functions that are relevant to the development of the sectoral emission target. Schedule 2 lists the national department state-owned entities responsible for certain functions required to develop the sector adaptation strategy and plan. Schedule 3, in its current form, provides the interim national greenhouse gas emission trajectory, something that I would provide another slide for consideration, as ministers alluded to. And Schedule 4 lists legislation that must be amended. The next slide. In terms of Schedule 3, and I think this is where the minister was making an emphasis that a consideration must be made. Schedule 3 describes the national greenhouse emission trajectory that was developed and outlined in the National Climate Change Response White Paper prior to the nationally determined contribution revision. And since the development of the bill, the scientific community, through the IPCC in its latest sixth assessment report, underscored the urgency for countries to increase ambition by developing targets that are compatible towards 1.5 degrees objective as set by the international players. And South Africa, through its NDC, revised its target in response to the scientific evidence, raising ambition for its contribution to the global effort to keep within the 1.5 degrees objective. And the revised NDC was widely accepted by all stakeholders, reflected the urgency for climate action, noting the critical role that, of course, has been played by the Presidential Climate Commission in getting a consensus on the revised target within the NDC. So given the fact that the trajectory that is being listed is the trajectory that is in the policy, and it has been over a decade that the trajectory has been listed, and there has been, of course, a lot of development, scientific development, and in light of these, I think the consideration should be given for the potential removal of this schedule from the bill, just to make sure that as it is processed, it takes into account very relevant scientific information, and it is in line with the current push to really respond to the challenges of climate change. And I think it's something that Minister highlighted, that it's something that the committee should consider or look into, given the fact that the bill is now within the committee. Next slide. I think there was also the issue around public participation, just to emphasize that the bill provides for provision for consultation as well as public participation clauses 28 and 29, thus allowing for a transparent process in the decision making. And further, the issue of mainstreaming the bill provide or make provision for the integration of climate change in the various spheres of government, particularly reflected in Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. And just to also emphasize that there are ongoing collaboration with various organs of state entities, donor partners on the implementation of various interventions on ground. Next slide. The socio-economic study has been undertaken this year as part of the bill, and we're just highlighting some of the key elements that have been highlighted in the study. One, the vulnerable low-income household and the marginalized unemployment will face the most severe impact unless urgent steps are taken to reduce South Africa's vulnerability to climate and economic shock. The climate change response will, of course, attempt to reduce the impact on job losses, promote job creation during a shift to the new green economy, and these are some of the elements are highlighted in the social impact assessment. The poor are also the most vulnerable to climate change, so introducing measures to mitigate and adapt to it will also serve to foster equity. Climate change adaptation can contribute to, of course, infrastructure that is climate resilient, thus enabling services to community that live in the climate hotspot areas, building the capacity for local government to respond to challenges associated with climate change will be central to the implementation of the bill and the act. Once it becomes an act, it will be an act. And the next slide, please, highlighting the socio-economic impact assessment issues. It's not moving on my side. Yeah, thank you so much. Furthermore, the proposal set out in the climate change bill serves as a critical defense against climate change impact by reducing vulnerability of South Africa's food, water, health, ecosystem, human settlement to the impact of climate change, and also contributes to fostering social cohesion. The study further underscore that early adaptive measures will decrease the exposure to or enhance the adaptive capacity to respond to the impacts associated with increased incidence of extreme weather events, particularly on the most vulnerable, such as the poor, the low income, women, children, and the rural farmers. So it really emphasized early adaptive measures as key. And government, including, of course, relevant sectors, provinces, and municipalities, will likely need to carry the cost for planning and development of various instruments, interventions of programs, of course, ensuring capacity across the spheres of government to enforce the legal framework and undertake necessary studies and plans as contemplated into in the climate change bill. Next slide. The bill is a framework legislation, and I think on the issue of the other cases, the environmental impact assessment regulation published in terms of the National Environmental Management Act, in the case of Thabamets, determines what assessment must be done. I think the question really was, would the bill stop the court cases? We're just highlighting that there are other processes that are taken into consideration when undertaking the environmental impact assessment. The next slide. These are some of the ongoing activities that we thought we should highlight in terms of the work on climate change, working with sector department, development of the climate sectoral adaptation plans for these various sectors: agriculture, water, forestry, fisheries, health, biodiversity, working with all the provinces to develop climate change response plans, and working with all the districts to develop to capacitate them in mainstreaming climate change into the IDP, but also supporting them in developing climate change response at the district level. And of course, the approval of the climate change adaptation strategy, of which once the bill is passed into act will give it a legal basis upon which it will guide all spheres of society, and implementation of the voluntary carbon budget that has been ongoing, and the ongoing companies submitting the mitigation plans, and of course the implementation of the greenhouse gas reporting systems where companies report their emissions annually since 2017. The next slide. The last slide really is just showing the mitigation systems, which we have presented quite a lot, and talks about the mitigation goals, the sectoral emission target, the implementation of the mitigation plans, the PEMs, the policies and measures from other sector department, allocation of carbon budget, and of course the ongoing monitoring the greenhouse gas emission inventory reports being able to be generated from that perspective. And I think the other things, the trajectory that we spoke about, that might require consideration within the current formulation. Next slide. Honorable Chair, thank you so much, and thank you to other members for attention. I hand over to you, Honorable Chair.
Thank you very much, Jongi. Siyabonga Baba. Honorable members, may I invite you to engage with the presentation. See the hand of Honorable Weber and the hand of Honorable Bryant, the hand of Honorable Phillips. In that order for now. Honorable Singh, you'll come last.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I hope the Minister is still on. I might have a question. I want to ask, I like the bill and I like what we're trying to plan and I like the processes, the things that we want to mitigate and to implement and it is time. And yes, I know I sound like an old report. Chair, Minister, my issue with this is I would like to see another clause added. And I know there's a long process to this, but we work and we have good bills, we have good laws. The enforcement of these laws is a problem for me. And we set the rules for the companies, but what are we really doing when they don't adhere, when we struggle with 1.5? And that's why I have sort of a problem with Schedule 3 that the Minister wants to remove. And maybe we replace it with new facts or new things, but Minister, there is a problem with the enforcement of the laws and the bills and everything that we have. And I would like to have a more dedicated clause in this specific bill, although you might say this is not supposed to be with this bill. But I would like to see us adding that to ensure with more strict consequences. It doesn't help to find a mine or a power station, 10 million rand. They can easily budget for that if they can. There must be consequences so that people will adhere to the rules that we have. So I don't know if we can work together on it and there might be a real answer to why it's not there. But we have all of these things, but even in practical real life, it stops there. And we have the EMIs, we have many people, but the real challenge is on the ground, not is enforcing our laws, not implementing the enforcement of our laws. How are we going to do it? Who is going to do it? And what will the consequence be of when we don't do this? Because this is the reason why we're struggling with climate change. Not our laws, it's the consequences and the enforcement of the laws and the prosecution, what actually happens to it. So I would like you to consider that. Thank you very much, Jay.
Honorable Brian.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chairperson, the presentation we received was good, I think, to an extent. But I'm going to request some further information, which I think we need, particularly around public participation. But that's when I get to the end of a couple of points that I'd like to raise. I agree with what the Minister said in her opening, that we are operating in a developing country and we do have competing priorities, but that we can't see that as a hurdle and something that we're going to struggle to get over. We have to find ways to ensure that we prioritize issues relating to climate change, because it's going to affect all sectors of society, rich and poor, across all cultures, across all regions. And we need to ensure that we factor that into our planning, and that's why this bill is so important. One point that I'd like to ask for some specific feedback on, and which I found quite incongruent with the rest of the document and where we currently sit in terms of living through climate change, as was evidenced with the tragic floods, the droughts that are ongoing in certain parts of our country, high temperatures, etc. And that was in terms of the point under principles that we should be adopting a risk-averse and cautious approach in terms of our limited knowledge of the causes of climate change. Now, if one reads the latest IPCC report, I think it is quite specific in terms of the scientific position on the causes of climate change, firstly. And secondly, we can't be adopting a risk-averse and cautious approach. I mean, what we really need to be doing is making bold and courageous steps that are going to require a degree of risk, but at the end of the day are going to safeguard us against the worst impacts of climate change going forward. So I'm just, when the minister spoke about certain parts of the bill being a little bit out of date, I would suggest that that bullet point might be a little bit out of date as well. I have a question in terms of the involvement of local government and municipalities particularly. I really like the approach, which is a lot more federal and consultative in terms of ensuring that all spheres of government are able to draft their own plans and strategies and make inputs, and that really is fantastic. I think the challenge is going to be in some of our more rural district municipalities. And I mean, let's call a spade a spade. Many of these municipalities are really struggling to function. Some municipalities, aren't able to provide water and services, and to expect them to draft highly sophisticated climate change adaptation strategies, I think might be a bit of a bridge too far. So is there a plan or an intention to empower those municipalities to ensure that they have adequate resources and access to professionals who can assist them? Because we know that in many of these district and rural municipalities, they face significant challenges that could be exacerbated or will be exacerbated by the impacts of climate change going forward. In terms of the consultative process as well, I mean, I know one doesn't weigh up the inputs in a kind of voting system, but if one is consulting and taking inputs from a number of different municipalities, the weighting of a metropolitan municipality, for instance, with a few million citizens, compared to the input of a smaller local municipality in a rural area, I assume that that consultation process is, going to be done in a way that ensures that all voices are heard and that we don't have, sort of one thread going through, which is, the kind of concerns of metropolitan areas, and that, all areas across the country have those have their concerns taken into consideration when the minister is looking into those amendments to legislation. Clause 10, and this is the Presidential Climate Change Commission. I have a question in terms of the wording, and I know in a lot of policy we tend to heckle over the words must and may. And in clause 10, it says that the president may appoint or may set up a commission. In other parts of this bill, it speaks quite specifically about responsibilities of the minister, that the minister must do X, Y, and Z. Why is the Presidential Climate Change Commission optional? Because to me, it is a central aspect of the success of this legislation going forward. And should we rather not be looking at stating that the president must set this commission up, especially if it's going to end up having regulated status going forward. And that takes me further to point 10.1, where the members are listed in terms of sectors. And if we are looking at regulated status for that commission, I would certainly move that we need greater political representation on that commission. At present, we only have one member from our committee, which is Honourable Holomisa, who I know is doing a fantastic job. But there certainly would be a need going forward to ensure that more political parties are included on that commission, to ensure that that input is received and oversight can be properly conducted. I know we have 5 different political parties just on our own committee itself. And then finally, as I alluded to at the beginning, please can we have a breakdown, a detailed breakdown now of public participation and the route that this bill is going to take from here on out. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Honourable Bryant. Honourable Phillips.
Good morning to everyone. Good morning, Chair, Acting Chair, and thank you so much for the presentation. I have a number of questions. Some of them have already been touched on by my colleagues. The first one that I really need to emphasize so much is that this is so time sensitive. You know, we can't be saying within a year of or what. It's really, really urgent, and we need to be able to convey that urgency and work according to it. And then my honourable colleague Anne-Marie Weber touched on this as well, is that there is so much good legislation. But what scares me about this legislation in so many areas is the sentence, the minister may. Now, that's all good and well if we have a minister who actually cares about our environment. The problem is we could end up with a minister that has got other priorities. And then that may just becomes a won't do. So I'm really, really concerned about all those mays that the minister may do, especially in the light of the fact that we don't keep a minister for a long time. In 15.1, as Honourable Brian said, most municipalities have very little or no competency to draft or enforce or even prosecute any kind of environmental breaches. So there's a shortage in this bill to address the education. We need education of our lawmakers. We need education of people in oversight roles. We need education of the people who are supposed to enforce this bill. We can't just keep relying on the environmental inspectors that we've got now. They're a handful and they just can't do the job. We need to educate the prosecutors, but we also need to start at the beginning. We need to educate our people. And the best place to do that is to start in schools. So we need to look at some kind of curriculum change so that the children in our schools can understand how important this climate bill is for them on whichever level they are on at school. Then, yeah, we have the same thing with section 26, 27, it's maize, 27, 26, 27, and then the scariest one is that it says the regulations may be implemented. So does that mean that they're not going to be compulsory? That's 27C3. And then 29.3, this is the participation. It may allow interested person or community to present oral presentation. And then the 31, where the information will only become available subject to PIA and POPI. But surely what's happening in the environment is of utmost importance to everybody, and it should be open and transparent for everybody to see. Then we can see who the good people are, who the bad people or industry, who the good, the bad, and the ugly are. And then people can make informed decisions as to if they want to support those people. But why should the citizens and NGOs have to put in PIA applications to get information that is integral to not only our future, but to our children and our grandchildren's future as well? And then there's very little in the way of prosecutions. Again, that they may be prosecuted, but what is that going to look like? And shouldn't we be a little bit tougher on that? And then my final concern is what's been happening in the past is that as soon as the targets are not met or industry complain, then the targets are softened or the goalposts are moved to suit industry and to suit the role players. We need to draw a line in the sand, and we need to all support each other and say, this is the line in the sand, and this is what people have got to meet. Otherwise, it's just going to get further and further and further. And when the tipping point is reached, then it's going to be too late. And then there's nothing we can do about it. So I think that it's very important to go back and to look at this legislation and to make sure that these loopholes of maize, and depending on a minister that actually does have our environment at heart, really need to be closed up, so that the minister, whoever is the minister, is actually forced to look after our environment, irrespective of how they personally feel about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Phillips. Honorable Narensi. Honorable C.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. I may be having some connectivity problems because I could hear Honorable Phillips towards the end. I don't know if it was on my side or your. But firstly, let me thank you and thank the Minister and thank the presenters for taking us through this bill. And just to remind ourselves that we did receive a presentation of sorts on the 11th of March this year, where we flagged a number of issues, including the challenges that NEDLAC had with the bill. And I see one of them, which relates to the question polluter pays principle, is still outstanding. But I think a big reminder for us, there are a lot of maize here, which honorable colleagues have referred to, maybe because it's the month of May. But that aside, I think there should be peremptory clauses that give the national minister absolute powers in a number of these issues, albeit after consultation. Because I think government and the national department have come a long way in presenting before us as a committee a bill which to a large extent will provide mitigation to the climate change impact that we are having. But I think another serious reminder to us as members of this committee is that this bill is our bill now. It's no longer the bill of the executive or the minister. It becomes a committee bill. We can amend, scratch, delete, do whatever we want to, as long as there is consensus amongst us as members in parliament. And it becomes our responsibility now to initiate the clauses 28, 29, and 30, I think, which refers to consultation. And that's consultation with everybody. It'll be at provincial government level, it'll be at Salga level, it'll be at community level, NGO level, and whatever. And I think arising out of all of that, and some of the submissions, like Honorable Weber had a good point there. These are things that we have the authority and power to suggest amendments to this bill to make it a better bill, if I could use that word. So the power is in our hands at this moment in time, and we need to make sure that, just like we're doing with the Forest Amendment Bill, that we have adequate consultation processes, giving people an opportunity to consult us in writing, and then have oral representations and taking this bill around the country. So having said that, I think one of the other things that I see missing in the bill is, normally when a bill is presented to the to cabinet, there is a section on financial implications. And I don't know if that was presented to cabinet, because there's always the issue of, if one has to implement a bill, how much is it going to cost government at all levels, and do they have the resources to be able to implement? Prosecutorial monitoring, assisting municipalities, like Honorable Brian said, that may not have the adequate rate base, etc. So I think as we move along, Minister, we perhaps need to know if the department, in preparing this bill, has looked at possible financial implications of implementation. So that's the one aspect. The other aspect would be the issue of the socioeconomic impact. We spoke about it on the 11th of March, because I've got my notes here of the 11th of March. We spoke about the socioeconomic impact studies that need to be conducted. We spoke about just transition, what it means, and we spoke about alternates to communities. So I think that's something that we've got to also consider moving forward, because once this is passed into law, then we've got to make sure that communities who have been at the receiving end of the effect of climate change, to a large extent because of developments and huge developments taking place all over, and no mitigation, to a large extent because of these floodplains and houses being constructed there, to a large extent that Eskom is one of the biggest polluters, I think, not only in South Africa, but in Africa, and you can include Cecil in there as one of the people. I mean, we've got to know what the socioeconomic impact, we've got to know what the transition from coal to other sources of energy are going to be. So I think as we move forward, perhaps the department could assist us with those kind of studies, while we as a committee hear from communities and all interested stakeholders what their input is into this piece of legislation. But I think I agree with the Minister that we've got to now come up with a very, very, well, not now, but in the next week or so, come up with a very, very time-bound consultation process, allowing adequate consultation, so that by the end of this year, I would think at the latest, this bill in its amended form should be before Parliament and adopted. And then we will be serious. And after adoption, then the implementation and everything must be in a plan, in a well documented plan of action of how we're going to move forward. So I'll stop at that. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Singh. The other hands, no, the hand. Jongi, are you going first, and then the Minister will come later, or the Minister goes first?
Honorable Chair, I think the Minister can go first. Thank you.
Sure.
Honorable Chair, it's the DG here. I do not see Minister online.
Yeah, you're correct. She is not here.
the team responds, and obviously, Chair, there are aspects that the committee are highlighting that are very crucial and critical for us as a department to work with the committee in supporting now the processes that the committee is going to be going through. Given that, yes, the bill is now the bill of the committee, as correctly outlined by Honorable Singh. We can share with the committee around the consultative processes that we've taken as a department while the process was still on the executive side. But obviously, it does not necessarily mean that the committee cannot actually do further consultation. I think that is going to be determined by the committee. The other aspect, Chair, before I allow Jongi and Claude to respond, is around a critical point highlighted by members, especially on the capacity of other spheres of government, especially local government and rural municipalities. As a department, this is one of the critical aspects that we have recognized, and we are going to take it upon ourselves as a department to ensure that we empower and work very closely, especially when they have to come up with their various plans, mitigation plans, and also adaptation. We are then going to be working very closely with those municipalities, recognizing that they may not necessarily be having sufficient capacity in as far as the requirement of the bill is concerned. With your permission, Chair, I would request that Jongi comes through and Claude, and if the legal team can also then possibly come through just to elaborate and explain to the committee the use of may vis-a-vis must, and one understands very well the concerns of the committee, where the may indicate that things are optional, and how best are we going to then deal with those matters, especially when it gets to the regulation stage, where we spell out the details of what needs to be done by all stakeholders concerned in this bill. So with your permission, Chair, I'm going to request Jongi to come through and show, and also the legal team, just to address the issues that were raised by the honorable members. Thank you, Honorable Chair. Thank you.
Savumalana DG.
Okay.
Jongi.
Yes, thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Thank you, DG. I will touch on some of the questions raised by members and then allow my colleague Claude Amaru to answer the others, as well as our legal team. So in terms of the issue that was raised by Honorable Weber on the dealing with compliance and enforcement, as it was indicated by the Minister, you know, the bill is a framework bill, and mostly the aspects that are dealing with compliance and enforcement are those that are related to climate response, and in particular to the mitigation element. For example, if industry in non-compliant with, let's say, limits and so on. The reality is that the challenge is that some of those aspects are related to substantive technical aspects that in most cases must be reflected in the regulations. So that's why the bill talks to the need to develop regulations that provide the technical details that are needed. For example, in the issue of the allocation of carbon budgets and also the sectoral emission targets. The bill, because it's a framework bill, does not go into the substantive technical aspects, but the regulations, that are referred to will go to those substantive details and outline the modalities and principles for the allocation of those carbon budgets, circumstances under which, compliance and non-compliance is to be adjudged, and therefore the appropriate, penalties and also in some cases incentives linked to those mitigation instruments. Hence, the bill does not reflect a lot on those aspects. Honorable also touched on the issue that was discussed at NEDLEC in terms of the alignment between the carbon tax and the carbon budget. That will also be dealt with in terms of the regulations for allocation of carbon budgets that will be dealt with. And then also in terms of the issue that was raised by Honorable Sin in terms of the financial implications. What I can say is in terms of on the climate change response elements, particularly, for example, around mitigation, one observes that, for example, in the allocation of sectoral emission targets, we will be making use of existing policies and measures to drive the implementation of climate change. So, for example, policies and measures such as the integrated resource plan, those policies and measures are already government adopted policies and measures, and their financial implications have been quantified. So it is in that context that we take that into account. But my colleague, Flora Maru, will go in detail in terms of explaining what other assessment in terms of financial implications and socioeconomic aspects that were undertaken, particularly on the adaptation side. So I will pass on to him now to take over. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jongi and DG. Chair, maybe to start first with the one on consultation. Clause 28, Chair, outline the various clauses that have to be consulted upon, whereby when the minister would be expected to consult with cabinet members, consult with MECs, and consult with the executive. MECs will also be expected to consult with the Executive Council. So it covers quite a number of clauses. 19.1, I think it's around adaptation strategy. 19.1C, 21, I think it's around the adaptation information and synthesis report. 21/1, 21/4. So there is quite a series which we can unpack in a table as to what are the various instruments that will require that the minister consult with either the MEC, the affected ministers, so that it can be very clearly explicit. And there's also on clause 29, Chair, on the public participation process. This clause also outlines quite a number of clauses where in the development of instruments, there should be a clear public participation process, which include, among other things, advertisement into the newspaper, invitation for the public to submit their inputs to minister, MEC, and mayors as they develop all these various instruments. We can also provide a clear table that outline clearly what are those clauses that require public participation. It's quite a lot of them, Chair. I wanted to outline that one in terms of the clauses for consultation and the clauses for public participation. One is empowering that the minister will consult with the relevant ministers, relevant sector ministers. The MEC will consult with relevant MECs within the provinces, and so forth, whereas public participation also outlined very clearly the various instruments that has to go fully for public participation process. And I agree with DG, if there is a further request to outline how the consultative process were conducted, definitely we will provide such. There is also a comment around the risk averse. I think we indeed are in your hands. Now that science is quite very clearly pronounced, possibly that clause can be looked into as well. The issue around, I think it's Honorable Cheryl, the time sensitive I think the phrasing was to make sure that within 1 year in the May of the Act coming into effect, there are a number of things that has to be in place. And I think this is just to allow a process of the finalization of the Act and allow a system where this number of areas and instruments needs to be put in place, but I think we can also get guided there. The issue around the local sphere, I think DG has touched on it. Indeed, we have been working, Chair, with the district municipalities, providing them with the technical support through collaboration with our donors to develop, among other things, the adaptation response plans. And that is part of our ongoing close collaboration with other spheres to support them as necessary. And I agree that it's an important area to look into. And I'm just looking at the others on the, I think it's Honorable Narit Singh on the polluter pay principle, just to indicate that, yes, that's one area that particularly on the principle that was outstanding in the NETLEC, but however, what remains in the principle, what remains in the current formulation takes into account the principle of polluter pay principle. And it has been captured in the Act. Since this is a SEMA, it falls under the NEMA, so the principles of NEMA do apply, as I think we have alluded to that. And I think it's clear that we did not find consensus in NETLEC, but what was retained in the bill is the principles of polluter pay principle, as articulated within the NEMA. The issue of the financial implication, and I think Minister at some point responded on this to say that we did the socio-economic assessment, and in the socio-economic assessment, I think there was some level of financial assessment to say interventions would to a greater extent contributes towards addressing some of the potential impact, even financial impact, that the economy will suffer through climate change. And in terms of the actual administrative cost, I think we have costed that within the cabinet memorandum, where largely we are relying on existing instruments, both on adaptation, we're relying on existing instruments to develop the adaptation strategies, which has already been developed. We're relying on existing instruments to undertake the scenarios, and we're relying on the existing instrument to undertake the risk and vulnerability assessment. And I think we indicated that the better part of the work has been happening. However, the bill will therefore give it a legal basis. I think what was clear, honorable members, was there is no clear detailed costing as yet of the entire just transition. I think that has been clear and it has been noted. I'm just trying to check, Chair, if I'm not leaving other matters out, but maybe I can allow our colleagues, the legal team, to also come in on the May. Yes, on the May and the must. Maybe they must come in there because the manner in which the bill is structured, particularly on the must, those are the key regulations that must be in place to ensure that the bill is fully effective and implemented. When we go to Chapter 6 under General Matters, you could see there are categories of areas of regulations. One, the one that must be in place because they are very critical for the implementation of the bill. The other one is a may because some they hinging on the international engagement process. Like in relation to any matter necessary to give effect to the Republic's international climate change commitment and obligation, it has been indicated as a may because it really follows the international architecture. But on the one that we are very critical and it's a must. I mean, the regulation in relation to determination, review and revision and compliance of the allocated carbon budget, that has been clearly prescribed that it's a must. They are very central to the effectiveness of the bill. The phasing down and phasing out of synthetic greenhouse gas emissions, that is a must. It's very critical for the implementation of the bill. The promotion of the monitoring and evaluation and assessment, that is very critical. The greenhouse gas inventory, so that there is proper tracking. We can be able to access data to ensure that proper tracking and regulations prescribed in terms of the Act. So there are those two categories that you could see that in some instances, those which we know are very, very critical for the effective implementation of the bill, there have been a clear must, and those that to a greater extent also hinges on the global architecture has been provided as in May. I think, but I will allow the legal team also to, provide some input on this, Honorable Chair. Chair.
You spoke about the legal team that must clarify the maize in May. Can we invite the people of the legal team to clarify the maize in May?
Thank you, Honourable Chair. It's Vanessa Benderman. Good day to the honourable members and Chairperson. With regard to the May, as Chloe has indicated, what we need to decide is that in terms of may and must, we must determine whether what should remain discretionary and what should not, bearing in mind that if those regulations and if we make it an obligation and if it is not complied with, then we pose a litigation risk. And we need to also bear in mind that the coming into effect regulations that need to be brought to also be drafted and be brought into effect at the same time as the bill, which may delay the coming into effect of the bill. So the committee is correct. This is now a bill before this committee, and we need to analyze carefully what should remain discretionary and what should be an obligation in terms of the regulations, bearing in mind the litigation risk that it may pose, which may defeat what we are intending with this bill if we are challenged by companies for not bringing into effect certain provisions of the bill. And we have in the past been challenged in litigation and failed for not bringing into regulations that the bill or the Act makes it obligatory. In terms of the issue, I think it was Honourable Phillips raised the issue of Paya and Paya and Popia. We need to be very careful in terms of not in implementing this particular bill, that we do not act contrary to other legislation. Specifically, PIA is the Promotion of Access to Information Act. So when we refer to compliance of PIA and POPIA, we're trying to ensure that when we provide information, we will ensure that there is more access in terms of PIA. So what we need to try and do is make sure that a lot of the information is freely accessible, so that you do not have to follow a PIA request. You make it available in terms of the public. And in terms of POPIA, we are obliged to ensure that personal information is protected. So it is crucial that we ensure that the legislation is in compliance with PIA and POPIA. In terms of the, I think there is provision in terms of the legislation for enforcement, specifically clause 32, which provides for offences and penalties, which links back to section 49B2 of NEMA, which provides for penalties of 5 years or 5 million. or 10 years or 10 million. I think what we need to do is look at it and consider, give it further consideration, whether it adequately addresses big companies and whether this provision should be strengthened in terms of how we address the impact and the enforceability in that regard. I think from a legal point of view, I have responded, Chair, on most of the issues. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. If I can just come in on one question that we have not yet answered, that is around education and awareness. Just to indicate that we also agree that this is an important aspect and some elements of it are happening, but it's not at the scale that it should be. But in terms of the interventions that we've embarked on as a department, we work closely with SENBI and other institutions such as Rhodes University to develop a curriculum targeting largely high schools on mainstreaming climate change to the education curriculum for high school learners. But as you say, the scale of that needs to be enhanced. Also in terms of communities, we've also worked in collaboration with a number of institutions, largely targeting small-scale farmers in terms of doing climate smart agriculture and going to communities. But that also needs to be scaled up, Honorable Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jongi. Honorable members, may I invite you to do follow-ups? We'll take Honorable Weber, Honorable Phillips, Honorable Bryant, Honorable Singh, in that order.
Thank you, Chair. Jongi or Mr. Wheaty, I don't know how to pronounce his surname, but I looked at that now. It's very interesting surname. So I heard what your response was, and again, I'm going to lead on to what Mr. Singh said of us having an input here. I specifically don't think that enforcement should be going into regulations, into different kinds of things in between, just as a matter of fact, mentioning it. I would really like to insist that we have a specific clause on that in detail regarding all the kinds of enforcement for all the kinds of crimes and polluters and whatever. I understand what you said to me, but enforcement seems not to be, it shouldn't be the priority, but in South Africa's case, it should be the priority. And I really would like to enforce that you really consider that and take it through, because regulations and things comes in here and comes in here and comes here, and people just sort of, I would like the commitment that there will be a separate clause on this, addressing these issues and the way we will do this and the way we specifically, a very documented, detailed document.
Honorable Weber, towards the end, you faded a bit away. I'm not too sure if they heard you.
Okay. I didn't move, so I will just say that again. In short, I would like to encourage us to stand together and have a separate clause on enforcement and implementation. There's many things. The MIS is doing this, and the SAPS is doing this, and then we have that one, and this regulation, and that enforcement in that regulation. I would like to see in this climate bill a specific clause based on that, specifically for that brings these things together, and everyone knows how it is going. Not to look for regulation there and this. I hope Mr. Wheaty understands what I am saying, but enforcement is very important at this stage in South Africa, and it just can't be a last resource. Not that I said that's what they're doing. It should have its own little stance on what we're saying and how this will be enforced. So enforcement, the prosecution of it, and that helps us with the climate change bill. But if that is not there, we will struggle. Thank you very much. I hope that makes sense, colleagues.
Honorable Bryant.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you to presenters for their responses and the other officials. In as much as this is going to be our bill now to panel beat, so to speak, it's important for us to understand why certain aspects of the bill were put in place. And I think one in particular, and thank you also to Mr. Wheaty for agreeing on the potential for us to move away from this idea of a risk-averse approach if one looks at, the overwhelming evidence pointing to causes of climate change. But in terms of the Climate Change Commission, and I think this is a very central point, and I just want to dig into this a little bit further as to, from a legal perspective, why there is a need to stipulate that the Presidential Climate Change Commission is effectively optional, whereas the other consultation processes are not. And I get the point around putting one in a legal position at a later stage that could encumber the legislation from being properly enacted. But surely the setting up of the Presidential Climate Change Commission, which seems to be an essential aspect of the bill, isn't something that can be deemed to be optional. So I'm just trying to understand the rationale behind that a little bit further. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Bryant. Honorable Phillips.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you. I'm very excited to hear that it will be included in our curriculum for high school, and hopefully it will also be expanded to primary school. The one that I don't think, and it's only one that I've just looked at the moment, is Chapter 6, Regulation number 27. Point 1, where it says the minister may make regulations in relation to any matter necessary to give effect to the Republic's international climate change commitments and obligations. I don't know if that necessarily depends on any external forces. I mean, the minister must make regulations to give effect to the Republic's international climate change commitments and obligations. So I'm a little bit worried about that one. But and there just seem to be a few more where it becomes optional. And as I said, I'm very worried if we get a minister that is not committed to the climate, and then what they are going to do there. Thank you.
Honorable Singh.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairperson. Just my last comment on this. Thank you to Mr. Jongikaya and the DG and the legal advisors for their inputs. But I just want to make a point that, every piece of legislation is subject to and open to court challenges. But I think we as a committee, as long as
you fading away, Honorable C, you faded away completely.
Can you hear me now, Chair?
Loud and clear, Honorable Singh. Please start from the beginning.
Yeah. I said, I think it's now our responsibility. Thank you to those that responded to the question, the DG, Mr. Jongikaya, legal advisor. Piece of legislation in this country. Department will be able to enforce, and that those who are transgressors in terms of pollution, etc., must pay the price. think we've got to bell the cat at some time, like on the plastic bags issue in Kenya. They belled the cat, and yes, it's moving on smoothly. But having said that, Mr. Jongikaya also spoke about certain information that was presented to Cabinet, financial, etc. I think it's going to help us as a committee if all the information that was presented as part of motivating this bill to Cabinet is presented to the committee as well. Because when we go out on public hearings, etc., we will have an understanding. Now, the department have got their team of legal advisors. Then you have the state law advisor. Then we should have a parliament committee legal person that's allocated by Parliament. I know the last time we received a presentation on this bill, when I raised this issue, we were told that the person was not well. I don't know if at this stage we do have that person and who that person is, because that person has got to be following what we are saying and what everybody else is saying very, very closely as we go out on this public hearings. And then lastly, I think, I don't know whether we're going to do it today or at the next meeting, or ask our researchers and Parliament legal team to come up with some kind of a draft consultation timetable that the committee can consider. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Singh, DG and the team. Nicholas, may I request you to try and trace the minister in the meantime? DG.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thank you to the honorable members. I think as the members are highlighting further questions, critical is for us to clarify the rationale of what would have informed what currently is in the bill. And obviously, I think we need to be doing that to assist the further consultation process that the committee will be undertaking. I want to commit, Chair, that the information that would have informed all our socio-economic impact assessment that we did, that would have informed what we submitted to Cabinet will be shared with the committee as part of then the committee appreciating some of the clauses that we have in this bill, and how then the committee would need to be taking this forward in the consultation. Chair, with your permission, I think I would like to request Ms. Linda. She's part of the legal team in our department, just to explain the rationale around may and must. And one has noted the emphasis by Honorable Bryant on the Presidential Climate Commission, why it is an optional as opposed to be a must, as reflected in this bill. And we have also taken note, Chair, of Honorable Weber's emphasis around enforcement and how best then, in terms of implementation of this bill and regulations thereon, a need for a clear spelling out of how enforcement is going to be done, given that that's where the challenge normally is when implementing legislation. I'm going to request Ms. Linda Vanderman just to come back and respond to the issues that Honorable Bryant raised. Thank you, Chair.
Linda.
Thank you, Honorable Chair and Honorable members. The reason, I just want to put on my video. Yes, the reason why The reason why we have made it a may and not a must is just to give the president that discretion to appoint a presidential council and not necessarily bind the next administration, but it is one of the provisions that can be changed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Further responses? Anyone?
Chair, I think that's what we have from the department side in relation to the issues. I'm not quite sure. Minister might not be able to connect because she already is on board. I think it was indicated that she is flying. So I don't think she can be in a position to join in this meeting. But I would want to conclude, Chair, by indicating that on our side, all the information which we have, we are definitely going to be sharing with the committee as part of then the processes that the committee will then be taking forward. Thank you, Chair.
Honorable C.
Yeah, Chairperson, I'm sorry to come back again. Now that the minister is not, going to be available, she did, when she opened in opening remarks, say that there were certain anomalies and certain things that they would like to flag. Now, I'm not too quite clear of what the department has found as anomalies since the bill was tabled. So I think we have to be taken through that in due course. If they can just say, these are the anomalies that we also found, because this is an evolving thing. If the DG or somebody can just tell us what those are, so we don't leave the minister's statement just, in a way that it's not responded to. Thank you.
Honorable Weber, Honorable Bryant.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Singh, for reminding us again. I don't know if the committee agreed. I know the gentleman that gave the presentation spoke about Schedule 3, specifically that should not be there anymore. My query is, I actually think it should be there, maybe with new terminology or anything, but according to me, I agree that this is actually a very important slide, unless I missed something. Yes, maybe some updates, but definitely not being removed. So I would like to put that on record from my side. Thank you very much.
Honorable Bryant.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you very much for that response. I didn't catch the name of the official El Gali PP, whoever that is, but
let's just call her Linda.
That's it, Linda. Thank you so much. That clears it up perfectly. Sure. Chair, my only point is I know during our last discussion on this in March, there was an indication that the Chair was in the process of obtaining the codes to start looking at public participation or public hearings on this bill. I just wanted to know if there's any indication as to how far along that process is, because that falls into my earlier query in terms of the timeline for this and the work that we have to undertake now as a committee. Thanks.
Thank you, Honorable Bryant. DG, who's responding?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to highlight it at a high level, and I think Honorable Weber is quite right that it had to do with Schedule 3, where it actually describes the national greenhouse emission trajectory in terms of it being developed and outlined. The white paper that was done in 2012. And that was prior the revision of the NDCs, the nationally determined contribution. So I think what Minister was highlighting was that the NDCs have since been revised. And it actually targets and sets in terms of it setting certain targets that have scientific evidence,
which is an ambitious target, which we've set ourselves as a country, contributing towards keeping the climate objective of global efforts to the target of 1.5 degrees. So we on our side felt that that section might not necessarily be applicable. However, it does not necessarily stop the committee in applying itself around that Schedule 3. So I think that's what mainly she was highlighting, that the bill was done before we did the NDCs. And we've now set the targets, the ambitious targets, and that part might necessarily not be applicable at this point. I think that was the main one. Thank you, Chair.
Jongi, your mic is on.
Yeah, sorry, Honorable Chair, I can proceed.
Okay. All right. I take it that all the responses have been provided. Silence means consent. Silence is not always golden, but it means consent. Honorable Bryant, I'm sure you want to shoot for the last time today.
Thanks, Chair. It's not a question in as much as a word of thanks to the officials who were able to attend today. Unfortunately, as I say, it didn't work out quite as well with the minister, but I understand she's traveling. But for everybody who has attended today, from my side, as one of the people who requested the workshop, I think it has provided us with an opportunity to ask certain more specific questions and get a general understanding of where the drafters of the legislation were coming from initially. And this really is such an urgent and critical matter for us as South Africans to take forward, and rest assured that we will interrogate it, and we will add to it, and we will listen to the views of the public and civil society as well, to ensure that, albeit an urgent bill, it is one that is well considered and well crafted. So thank you very much, Chairperson, as well for your chairing of the meeting.
Thanks, Honorable Bryant. That's a great way of summarizing the meeting. You did extremely well on my behalf, as requested privately. Honorable members, with that being said, can we then agree that we will zoom into, we welcome the presentation and its workshop. It was quite informative, and that will continue scrutinizing and advising when necessary. Thanks very much to DG, your team, including your legal team. Pass our regards to the Minister. We hope she flies safe, and the DM from abroad. With that being said, honorable members, the meeting stands adjourned, and thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Chair. Another meeting that ended well before time. Thank you,
Chair.
But we did deal with the business. We did deal with the business.
Always on time, honorable. Always on time.
Thank you. Keep well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Recording stopped.